Okay, so last session we learned about logos, pathos, and ethos and what they are just in terms of when you're appealing to people, especially with types of evidence. And now we need to go much more deeper into all three of those and being very careful about how you build an argument. And we'll move on to this idea of what to avoid to create faulty reasoning. So we're going to start with logos, and as we already know, that is when you are appealing to a person's sense of logic. And there are certain types of methods that you would use, like historical facts and statistics and expert testimony and all of that. When you're creating a line of reasoning, when you're trying to create those claims to build down to support your assertion, there's these two different ways that you can do it. There's one's called inductive and one is called deductive. And both of these can be represented by a triangle. So you'll see how one's just an inversion of the other. So when you're doing inductive reasoning, quite frankly, it's already the way that you've been taught to write. Everything that we've really taught you at this point has been what we call academic writing. So when you're writing in college, and for me, this is what really you need to do. Okay, we'll talk about the other one in a second. So you're going to see it's just our normal triangle. And the way inductive works, and hang on, I'm not sure there's transition here. Yep, there we are. The way inductive reasoning works, it just means that you come to a conclusion by looking at specific things and then applying it to the general. So there's basically some steps here. It relies on these specific instances or examples to arrive to some particular conclusion. Your examples must be representative of whatever it is you're trying to get us to do. And if you have negative examples, they've got to be explained. So a lot of what I just got finished makes no sense. So let's take a look again at the visual because that will actually really help you. So you start, when you're inductively reasoning, you start with a specific claim or an assertion. Okay, and again, we know that assertions are often called thesis statements. So when you are writing inductively, you start with a thesis statement, an assertion. Okay, and in this particular case, my assertion is, my specific claim that I'm going to try to prove is that the three blondes in my class are dumb. And so I kind of bring up some evidence. One uses whiteout on her screen to correct typos. Another blonde, well, she can't even find the 10 button on her calculator, and so she says she can't do algebra. The last one, well, she thought the Cheerios were donut seeds. Okay, those three blondes are clearly not the brightest bulbs in the classroom, and so it seems that they very much support whatever it is that your assertion is. Now I'm going to just show you an example of this negative example that you have to explain. There is one smart blonde, so that's a negative example, but she dyes her hair, so she's not really truly blonde. Okay, so I've got my specific claim, the three blondes in my class are dumb. Got all this evidence that I can use, and so my only conclusion to derive from all of that is that, well, all blondes must be dumb. Okay, and so we typically write that way. We have our thesis. We then have all of our evidentiary paragraphs that kind of support what it is that we say, and then we get to our conclusion, and that's where you guys are so incredibly general, where you kind of go everything, and then you make this generalized conclusion. Okay, so this is typically the way that you're going to argue. Nothing is wrong with that. And again, it's pretty much how you would lead us to a conclusion if you were writing in the academic setting. But as we've already found out, in a professional setting, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Okay, because there is actually another line of reason that's just as valid to use as this one. Oh, there we are. Never mind. I don't know how that stuff got there. Never mind. And that is deductive reasoning. And that's the way professionals write. And that's why when I had you read that one piece on starting school later that talked about not just starting school later for students because they need the time to sleep, but also changing the culture. That's the one you did over last weekend. You find that there's actually several assertions. There's one at the beginning Okay, but yet then there's a more specific one at the end that was kind of leading it to us. And we'll find that as we look at a lot of the revolutionary writings and speeches and stuff, that most of the time they were using deductive reasoning rather than inductive. I'm not expecting you to be professionals. You can certainly write in an inductive way, but you do need to understand how professionals actually do it this way. If you want to try writing this way, that's really not a problem. All right, so what this means is that you're going to come to a conclusion by looking at the general first, then applying it to specific examples. Okay, so here is basically a sentence that's using deductive reasoning. Since all the trees I've seen have leaves, well then the dipterocarp tree in Borneo must have leaves. So notice that this triangle is actually inverted. It starts with what we know as the wide base, with that general observation, and then it moves us down to the specific claim or the assertion. So the general observation in that sentence is that all the trees I've seen have leaves. And then I had this evidence, okay, an oak tree in Northern California has leaves. The maple trees in Vermont have leaves. The palm trees in Tahiti have leaves, and the pine trees in Germany have leaves. And based on all this evidence that all the trees I've seen have leaves, therefore, leads me to my specific claim, my specific assertion that, well, even though I haven't seen it, the dipterocarp tree in Borneo must also have leaves. This is actually a much easier way of creating a line of reasoning and stuff, as it just kind of, basically you're leading your audience into the same conclusion, and you're leaving it so that they really can't explain to you why you're wrong. And now we're going to get into some really, really, really weird stuff. And I'm sorry about that. We're going to stick with deductive reasoning, that going from the general ideas and moving down to a specific conclusion, and realize that when you do that, there are two patterns. They're actually the same pattern. One is just a little bit different. It's missing something. So the first pattern is called a syllogism. You're going to start with your major premise, that general observation, that wide part of the triangle, okay? And then you start moving us down with your specific examples, and those are going to be called minor premises, okay, and stuff. So that's narrowing us down to the conclusion, where it kind of marries the general observation with the specific claim, and we get to the point, to the reasoning of that triangle. Okay, this is, I know, not making much sense at all. So here's some examples of a syllogism. So we start with that major premise: animals that have hooves eat grass. Notice that it's not specific. Okay, so it doesn't tell us what types of animals. It's a general observation, so we're trying to keep it as non-specific as possible. Animals that have hooves eat grass. And then we move to our minor premise, and this is where the specifics come in. Okay, horses have hooves. Cows have hooves. Pigs have hooves. Okay, and when you're creating the minor premise and you're adding in the specifics, you're only dealing with the first part of that major premise, the part that says animal have hooves. And once you've established that here's a whole bunch of animals that you know of that have hooves, okay, then you are now moving to the second part of your major premise and saying, well, then if a horse has hooves, it must eat grass. The same with cows and the same with pigs. So you're now adding in that second part of the major premise. I know it's still kind of blowing your mind a little bit. I'm going to give you a couple other visuals here. Okay, so let's try it this way. I want you to put these in order in your mind. Joe is in AP Lang. AP Lang students have to do a lot of writing. Joe must have to do a lot of writing. So you're looking for which one is your general observation first, which one is your specific example, your minor premise. Okay, remember the minor premise has to be a specific example of the first part of your general observation, your major premise. And then you have your conclusion, which then marries your specific example with the second part of the general conclusion. You think you got it? Here you are. The answer is 2, 1, 3. Okay, so AP Lang students have to do a lot of writing. That's my general observation. And then go to the specifics of the first part of the major premise, the general observation. So I've got AP Lang students, so I need to establish that Joe is in AP Lang. Okay, then I can add in the second part. So Joe must have to do a lot of writing. Okay, so there we go. So notice that what I'm going to say here, the first parts are always first. AP Lang, specific example, Joe is in AP Lang, and then we have Joe. If you wanted to add in your conclusion, Joe, who is in AP Lang, must have a lot of writing to do, that would be perfectly fine. And then you keep your second parts. It kind of skips the minor premise, but it goes right back to the second spot in your conclusion. So second parts are always second, and first parts are always first. You have to follow the order that's in your general observation. All right, and here is the second type of deductive reasoning. I got to go a little faster here. Something called an enthymeme. It's the exact same thing as a syllogism, but basically one of the premises, either the general observation or the specific example, is implied. It kind of skips over it because they're assuming that you can figure out those steps on your own. Okay, but it has to have a conclusion. It doesn't work if it doesn't. So here's an example. Mrs. Brewer has been teaching for 35 years, 36 now. She must like her teaching job. Okay, and so what we have missing is actually the general observation. People who stay long at their jobs must like it. Okay, because Mrs. Brewer is specific. Okay, it's a specific person, so you wouldn't find it in a general observation. So that's how we kind of know it's the minor premise. All right, now I want you to try it. Which premise is missing in this statement? The major premise, the general observation, or the minor premise, the specific example? All teenagers like to binge watch Criminal Minds. Joe binge watches Criminal Minds. Okay, let's see what, I don't even remember what I wrote. So here we are. Here's the answer. The major premise, the general observation, is that all teenagers like to binge watch Criminal Minds. What we're missing is, because we know that Joe, he's in the conclusion, our specific person, we've got to get Joe in with that first part of the major premise. So we have to establish in the specific example that Joe is a teenager. And since Joe is a teenager, he must be binge watching Criminal Minds. Okay? I know we're going to work on this a little bit when we get to the Zoom. It's why I wanted you to do it really quickly now. Because I didn't want to spend 15 minutes doing that. And we will work on that later, so I will just get rid of it. All right, so just have these notes down and definitely come with any questions that you have, but I'll go back over it. We'll do some practicing a little bit together before I put you into that breakout room. So see you all, let's see, you'll be watching this, so see you all Wednesday. Ta-ta for now.